First, let me welcome everybody and thank you for being here and on this and our panel for doing this. We appreciate your time and expertise, and I'll turn it over to NSMA Board President Wes Durham, who will introduce our panel.
Yeah, only about 8 more months left of that title, by the way. Thanks, everybody. Those of you that dialed in the first time for the seminar we did in September, if you didn't and this is your first time, I hope you get something out of this. This is kind of a continuance of our Convergence Summit that we do at the awards weekend, which lasts all day. If you've been there before, you know how productive it can be. It's kind of a mission element of what we're doing with this organization. It's something that I think is a responsibility in our industry to pay it forward. And I'm grateful to the folks who have participated, Nicole Auerbach, Ryan McGee, ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips in September. And today, I'm really excited about the people that are going to be participating here. First of all, let me thank Dr. Ken Gaither, the Dean of the School of Communications at Elon University, for helping sponsor these. My alma mater, proud as hell to be a graduate and a product of the school, and delighted with the work they're doing like Elon has, and young and aspiring people that want to be in this business. So it means a lot that they would participate in this, and I know some of their students are involved in this, and I'm delighted to have them aboard for sure. Real quick, the panelists today, if you saw the news we sent out on social media, Ryan Radtke is here, the voice of the NFL on Sunday Night Football for Westwood One, a terrific voice, terrific preparation guy, just from a standpoint of doing those games, and the way those games come off is just first rate. Jason Ross Jr. is here, who is a guy who is in this industry. I don't even want to say how many different sports you've done, Jason, but there's a lot of them. I think he's done a dozen, everything except Australian rules football, and he may have done that. So we'll go with that. Brandon Gaudin is here, the television voice of the Atlanta Braves. Before that, was at Georgia Tech. After the clown left after 18 years to go to television, he came in and did a hell of a job. And not only does the Braves, but also does stuff for Fox and FS1, and may or may not have been the voice of the Madden game and still involved in the Madden production. And if you have questions about the Madden production today, get ready. It's a remarkable, remarkable thing. And the moderator for this is NSMA board member and the voice of the Seattle Kraken on radio, Fighting Bowling Green State University Falcon. There we go. Get all the props up. Everett Fitzhugh. So thank you guys for doing this, and thanks again to Elon for presenting the Convergence, and hope everybody gets something from this. Everett, you're on.
Well, Wes, thanks very much, man. You actually saved me about 3.5, 4 minutes. I had a whole intro of these guys written up, but you ran through the resumes, so I think we'll just jump right into it. And I'm gonna start with the first person I see on my screen, Ryan, and then we'll go around the room, and then we'll keep going from here. Real quick, if you guys have questions, I want this to be an open forum. I'm going to do my best to keep this flowing. I'm going to monitor the chat. I know we only have an hour. I don't have anywhere to be until I got to pick up my son at 4:30 Pacific time. So if y'all want to hang out and kick it for a bit, I'm perfectly fine with doing that as well. So I'll start with you, Ryan. Just your favorite part about prepping for the game. Do you have a favorite part? Is it something that you just feel like you have to do it, otherwise I'm not going to know what I'm going to talk about? What do you like most about prepping for play-by-play for a game?
Yeah, it's interesting, Everett. For me, it's kind of a security blanket, right? Like the more prep you put in, the more you feel like when that light goes on Sunday night or whenever it might be, that you're ready for this, that you're not, wondering, do I have everything? What about this? What about that? Did I read enough? I think when you do the prep throughout the week and you can go into a game feeling like I'm absolutely ready for everything that is going to come my way, it's just a comforting feeling. I think any of us who have done baseball, I did a lot of baseball in my time. I'm sure Brandon could probably talk about this. When you have that, day game after a night game, Sometimes you just don't have the hours, and you gotta fly by the seat of your pants a little bit, and that can be a little bit challenging at times. But I think that's what it is for me. Just feeling like I've done what I need to do to be ready for this, and that I can be at my best, and then go out and just have fun and watch the game and call the game.
Brandon, how about you?
I mean, I think to do this, you have to love the preparation of it. I remember in college, there were a lot of people that wanted to get into this, and the ones that kind of really were drawn to the lights, camera, and the action are no longer in the business. And the ones who loved the art of preparing and getting ready for the broadcast that are my friends from college are still in the business. And look, we're at a time, I would say this, where the fans are smarter than they've ever been because everything is at their fingertips on their phone. Anything you say can be fact checked really quickly. That makes our job, it makes it easier in one sense because we have access to so much information to prepare for. It makes it harder that you really got to be on your P's and Q's. But I love in particular for me the art of a good story and prepping that and bringing a good story to light that maybe the viewer hasn't heard before. So certainly I like to batten down the hatches on all the numbers. I think numbers are very important, but I also like making these players real and relatable. And that's something that I always enjoy in the prep process.
How about you, Jason?
Yeah, I think to Brandon's point, I love learning about people, learning new things about people. We just had a story on a football game recently for South Florida where one of the receivers who was going to set the program record for single season receptions, he was a former walk-on. And we learned by talking to him that before he got the scholarship to pay tuition, he would work at a local restaurant nearby called Meat Market. And little things like that to kind of humanize people, get their journeys, and really uncover who they are as people to get to where they are now. I think it's a fun part about the job. Always, you never know what you're going to learn day by day. That's why this job is so fun. It's always different every day, no matter who you're talking to. You might get something new, and there's just a feeling that's kind of indescribable when you get that nugget or note that you really love, and then the team effort behind the scenes to execute that is another thing we'll talk about because it's not just you. It's a lot of people on a crew behind the scenes that do a lot of work that goes into producing that story or that little nugget that comes out, after a third down play or whatever it might be. I think that's really fun to find those spots as a team to execute that.
You all have done various sports. You've all done football and basketball and baseball. Jason, you've done hockey. You did the first tennis game on the moon, as Western said. You've got your hands in a lot of stuff. Other than the obvious differences in the sport itself, what do you find is the biggest difference? And Jason, we'll keep it with you in prepping for multiple sports that you cover.
Yeah, I think for me, I guess from like a rudimentary fundamental standpoint, I got a chart here for basketball. Like I handwrite my basketball charts, but then football, I print out. Hockey is a handwritten one for me, Ev. I don't know if you go by, some guys go by lines, some guys go numerical order. Like it's all different for everyone. That's why I think this is such a fun art form because everyone can do it a different way and there's no real wrong way to do it. It's just what works best for you. So I think for me, discovering first and foremost what the preparation process is for that sport. I do gymnastics as well. I called powerlifting in the Special Olympics in Germany, and that one was just kind of learning how to first and foremost what are the different lifts, and then also learn about the athletes, the different countries. So I had a 100-page Google Doc for that with about 74 different countries. How to pronounce some of the names of those countries were on there. So like it's just different for different sports in terms of how I'm looking at my notes in front of me, what's most efficient. I think as you go on in this, you'll find out what's most efficient for you. For me, that's been a key word. How can I be efficient before getting on a plane? How can I be efficient before getting in a car? We're going to have to drive 2.5 hours. Like this week, I have a game in Georgia. I fly to Savannah, Georgia, but then the game is 2 hours away. So I got to get in a car. So like, how can you be efficient with your time and prep to navigate your travel is another element to play-by-play. I think for me also, when it comes to prep, I mentioned talking to people. I love talking to people like college sports. I love talking to SIDs. So before I get on the phone with coaches and players, I like to hop on the phone with the SID on Monday, kind of get a breakdown. Say it's, week 9. I want to try to put myself in a place, now we're going to get to, team prep if you're calling a team versus national, but I want to try to put myself in a place where I understand where both fan bases are coming from. So for me, if I'm jumping in week 9 with a team I haven't had, I really want to jump on the phone with the SID who's around the team on a daily basis. And then I can get the perspective of someone who is with that team on a daily basis because it's hard, but I want to try to put myself in a place where I can understand where the people who have been there every day are thinking, what they were thinking moving forward, what they were thinking last week, what they were thinking 3 weeks ago, and what they were thinking entering the season. So for me, it's a lot of stuff I'm talking about right now that's coming together as one, but it looks different for different sports. Sometimes I'll go back to the powerlifting note. Like I really had to sit down and watch powerlifting and learn powerlifting. Same with gymnastics. I've never competed in those two sports. So with those sports, fortunately, I'm working with some pretty high level Olympians who competed in those sports. They're awesome people. So I like to pick their brains and watch the sport with them, sit down, watch how people are calling it, talk to people who have called it before. So that's kind of the element that goes into the Olympic sports. Now, Ryan has jumped into the Olympic sports, so he'll probably touch on that. But yeah, that's kind of my basis of things I like to cover to at least start out.
Yeah, Ryan, let's go over to you. Same question.
Yeah, I mean, to pick up just on the Olympics point that Jason was making, a couple of years ago when I went to South Korea and I did bobsled and luge and, things like skeleton. I mean, I really had no idea about those sports at all. And so it was really a lot of time just, finding everything you could of YouTube clips and watching the sport and familiarizing yourself with terminology and also finding the pace to those sports. How do you call this? What is the pace? How does this go? That was a very different experience that took a lot of work versus a sport that, we all played growing up that we're all somewhat used to. I think when you start talking about, football, basketball, baseball, a lot of the preparation really depends on how much time you have. If you have, a football game on Sunday and then don't have another one till next Sunday and you have all week to devote to that game, you can dive into every nook and cranny of the game if you want. Some people do that. Some people like to cut it off at some point. I can tell you a couple of years ago, I had the Packers and Cowboys in the wild card game in Dallas. And it was funny, all week, obviously you got two historical franchises. And so the notes just kept coming. Every day there was a new 25-page note packet on these teams, not just what they had done this year, but the historical significance of the matchup. And I got to a point where I finally said, I got to stop reading this. I'm burying myself in minutia that is never, ever going to make air. And it was funny. I hadn't talked to my partner, Mike Golick, about it, but we were sitting before the game, maybe 30 minutes before air. And he looked at me and he said, did you read everything they sent you this week? And I said, no. I said, on Thursday, I just kind of stopped. And he said, I feel so much better because I did the same thing. I just felt like there's too much. So I think that while preparation is very important, you also sometimes have to know when to say when, because if you bury yourself in every single little detail, that's exactly where you're going to be. You're going to be buried and you're going to miss the headline while you're worried about paragraph 9, sentence 3. You know what I mean? Yeah. The other part of that, I would say, like, doing the NCAA basketball tournament, when you don't find out until Sunday night who your teams are, and really, maybe Wednesday, you have to be ready to go because you're going to be talking to coaches and players and things like that. I know the first year I did the tournament, I found myself really scrambling. And it was after that I realized when you're doing an event like that, you really need to know the headlines. When you have less than 72 hours to prepare for 8 teams, the most important thing to me is know the headlines. Know that the guy led the conference in scoring. Know that he was an All-American, whatever it may be, but maybe not worry about the fact that his third cousin, runs an ice cream shop that's wildly successful in said town or whatever it is. So I think a lot of it does depend on the time you have to put into it and realizing what you need to prioritize in order to be your best.
I'm never going to turn down an ice cream recommendation.
Neither would I.
Yeah. I want to get to all that in a second, but Brandon, as someone who does the Braves and you're around that locker room, you're around that team for 150 plus games a year, but then you also get to parachute into Durham and call ACC basketball or whatever the case may be. How do you prep? And what's your biggest difference between prepping for a Mets Braves game, a team that you cover, versus parachuting in for 48 hours to do one game and then you're on your way out again?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think Ryan was kind of getting to something there at the end that everybody on this call probably is aware of, but you really have to look at each broadcast and say, okay, who am I catering to here? And when I do a Braves broadcast, which I know is viewed by 90% Braves fans versus when I do UCLA, Arizona this Friday, that is two totally different preparation standpoints for me. Now, I think it's probably the same amount of time put into both, but in a different way. So if I'm in the middle of the Braves season, I have a process. I've really, the last couple of years, started to rely heavily on Microsoft OneNote. It is where I go and put any information that I come across that I find interesting. I have a section for every player on every team, and then I have a team notes section. And I dump everything there that I find of interest, that I find via articles that the beat writers wrote on Twitter. And that's what I use Twitter for mainly, is just following these beat writers. And then from OneNote, I go to my boards and I say, what in OneNote of these 100 notes that I might have on the Braves right fielder Ronald Acuna Jr., what is the most important stuff that I think the viewer needs to know? And then I pick and choose and put that on the board, because I don't want to be inundated like I used to be in my career, like Ryan was saying, with so much stuff that you almost don't get to any of it because your mind is so flooded with so many facts and so many pieces of information. So that's a trick within the last few years, no matter who I'm covering, what network, that has been extremely beneficial for me. But as Ryan used a good word, the headline. So for this UCLA-Arizona game this weekend, it's a top 15 matchup. The storylines kind of sell themselves. But who's going to be viewing that game? Casual college basketball fans. Yeah, they know a little bit about UCLA or Arizona, but they're tuning in to see these teams for the first time, maybe the second time this year. So what may seem like a pedestrian note to you about Koa Pete, the Arizona star, being a McDonald's All-American and having 27 points in his first game, 90% of the viewers don't know that. To you, it's like, well, I'm not going to say that because everybody knows it. They don't. And I think sometimes we lose that casual viewer by talking over their heads with notes 3, 4, and 5 when you need to start by introducing that player with notes 1 and 2. Now, I will finish with this, Everett, kind of going against that. When I do the Braves and I'm talking about the Atlanta Braves every night, I always try to get one fresh nugget on every starter for each game. And I do that by going down to batting practice, talking to the players and coaches. Okay, how can I tell Ronald Acuna's story different tonight? And I'm sure you do the same thing because you're in kind of the similar role. How can I tell their story just a little bit differently tonight? Because if I just give their bio every night, game 20 with the same audience, they're like, yeah, buddy, we got it. We know where he's from and how old he is. And so it is a totally different preparation, but I love the different nuances of each of those.
You know, if I could just pick up on a point that Brandon is making there, you know, when you get all this information, there's so much stuff that's out there now. There's so many different stats and stories that are available. One thing that I find really important for me, especially, you know, doing radio, is how am I going to use this? And can I use this in a concise way? Because it's different, like radio versus TV, right? Sometimes when you have a graphic on television that you can put up, you can relate to that stat. Let's say, I mean, every week you see this in the NFL where, you know, he's the only player in the last whatever years that has 700 tackles and 20 sacks and 15 passes defensed and whatever. Now, if that's on a graphic and you have 30 seconds to maybe dive into that, it's a terrific thing to talk about. If I have 10 seconds in between plays on radio, that's probably not something that I can convey properly. So a lot of times stuff that goes on my boards, I've thought about ahead of time, how would I use this? Can I get to this in a certain spot? Because I think there's stuff that it can be really good stuff, but if you can't convey it properly to your audience, it's really not worth using.
Hey, Brandon, do you think that's even more important in the day and age of the transfer portal, to that introductory aspect of a player, not overlooking that?
Yes, I 100% think so. And I try to keep that in mind. Like USC, I've got a game for them this weekend too. And they've got every single player that they have except for one is new. So what I do on my sheets, and maybe we're getting the cart ahead of the horse here, but I personally, and everybody has their own system, I highlight in yellow what I call my introductory bullet points. The thing that when I'm talking about that player that I think is most important. spent the last 3 years at Arizona. Now he's at USC, transfer because of a coaching change, whatever. How can I intro that player in 8 to 10 seconds to make sure that the viewer knows, okay, I got a little something. And then I put my top secondary nuggets in orange. That's how I highlight them. And then ones that are lower, that if the player just has an amazing game and I want to get to, or maybe it's a deeper story, I don't highlight them in anything, but they're there. And so I kind of have a 3-tier system. But yes, Jason, to your point, the transfer portal, I think, has kind of changed how we broadcast these games a little bit. And I would say one thing to Ryan's point that I think is spot on. I don't prep differently for radio and TV. I mean, I haven't done radio in a couple of years, but Ryan, I know with Westwood One, we worked for a guy named Howie Dinneroff who was so particular. So I would prep the same, but I did do my boards differently. So for people who are interested in how to do radio and TV, I would take my notes and cut them in half for radio so that I didn't get too bogged down, like Ryan said, in important information, because that listener on radio is vulnerable. They need your every word. They need to know what's going on first and foremost. And so I really try to change my style with that over the years.
I want to switch gears for a bit. And I think this next one, Jason and Ryan, will gear toward you, but obviously, Brandon, please feel free to jump in. With both of you guys having done Olympics before, we know the big four: baseball, basketball, football, hockey. I might not know powerlifting. I might not know bobsledding. I might not know artistic gymnastics. What is your prep like in the Olympics for those non-big four, those non-traditional sports that we all love to watch every 4 years? Or Jason, in your case, you do a ton of gymnastics and volleyball. I'm not the biggest gymnastics and volleyball fan. There might not be a lot of info out there. If I'm that person, how are you reaching that person with your prep?
Yeah, I think of understanding as well that there's a group of people out there who you may call a niche audience for that sport, but a very passionate group of people who love and watch gymnastics every week, college gymnastics. When the Olympics roll around, of course, that's when it becomes a more global viewership on it. But there are people who are dedicated to this each day and every month of the year when it comes to trials leading up to the Olympics. And with powerlifting, I think kind of understanding the history of the sport as well, learning about it, pretty deep dive. And for me, having never really been involved in it up until doing the 2023 Special Olympics. Then with gymnastics, I work with Olympians who are in it on a daily basis. One of my analysts, Sam Petchik, she runs gymnastics camps. And I work with another analyst, Bridget Sloan, who they were both in Beijing in 2008 together. So kind of getting a feel for what they've gone through in the sport as athletes and understanding what the life of a gymnast is like. And they tend to grow up in it from age 2 until they call it a day after an Olympics or two. And I think understanding their journeys, but also knowing that I need to kind of stay in my lane as well. I'm not going to try to pretend as if I competed in the Olympics as a gymnast, because I definitely didn't. So I think understanding that there's kind of a function to, each event and how I'm going to call it. For me, it's mostly teeing up the gymnast, or say with powerlifter in that case, the Special Olympics, as they go up to whichever event it is, whichever lift it is, whichever apparatus it is. So I'm giving their background, their bio, maybe a thing or two on the country and maybe how many medals that country has to this point at that stage of the Olympics. But at that point, I'm leaving definitely the analysis part of it up to the gymnast. Because I go back to that fan base being somewhat of a niche fan base. They'll rat you out pretty quickly if you try to pretend as if you know something you don't. So you got to be really careful of that. So I think understanding what your role is and what you're there to do, and that you have a very, very smart person next to you. The reason I brought up their life in gymnastics, because they've been in this for a long time. So relying on that there's a really good person in the seat next to you for a reason. Special Olympics with Berlin, I got to work with Cheryl Hayworth. She was competing in weightlifting, and I believe it was Sydney. Yeah, it was Sydney. And then mentioned Sam and Bridget in 2008 in Beijing. So I think just understanding that there's someone next to you who's really competent in that spot, and you got to figure out how you're going to tee them up. So my prep is really how I'm going to tee them up. So knowing in production meetings what they want to get to, I have little notes, Sam, then it might be just something small in my notes just to trigger my mind on that note I have or story I have for when this athlete goes up on bars or beam or floor. So for me, it's knowing when and where to pick my spots and not to try to overdo it, because there's someone next to you for a reason.
Yeah, Ryan.
Yeah, I think Jason just nailed that completely. I mean, I know when I was doing the Olympics, I worked with Doug Lewis, who was an Olympian. We were doing skiing, and I told Doug, I said, listen, man, I'm going to start this thing and I'm going to finish this thing, and in between, it's all yours, because I can't talk about the technical aspects of what's going on because I don't ski. I certainly haven't done it that level, and I don't even do it at a weekender level. So you're the one who has to explain this stuff. I can give the bio information, I can give the times, I can do all that, but in terms of the technical stuff, you got to do that. And look, we all have egos, right? We all are we believe in ourselves, but you have to know when you have to cede the spotlight a little bit, right? And there's no better time than when you're doing some of these sports where the person sitting next to you has a lifetime of knowledge that it doesn't matter how hard you study, it doesn't matter how much you watch, it doesn't matter how many questions you ask, you will never have the same base of knowledge as that person that's sitting next to you. And so I think that is so important to lean on those folks, to ask questions. I know when we started doing skiing, there was times Doug and I would get there early, and when people were warming up, we would do just some like mock runs. And afterwards, I would say to Doug, all right, can you critique me? Tell me, did I say something that was dumb? And, again, it's kind of trying to put your own ego to the side for a minute, because I didn't want him to say, no, you're doing great. I wanted him to say, yeah, don't say that. You sound stupid when you say that. The people that know skiing are like, what does that even mean? So you have to understand, who you're working with and rely on them to help you, I think, a lot in those situations. Now, when you're doing bobsled and skeleton and you don't have an analyst and you're just kind of figuring it out, you do your best. You learn as much of the terminology as you can. But again, as Jason said, stay in your lane, right? Like don't give them the nuts and bolts that you can give them. Don't start trying to analyze the technique of an Olympian bobsledder, because that's just crazy. The same way that I'm sure, Brandon isn't breaking down a Braves pitcher's mechanics and talking about what he could do better, because yeah, look, we know the game, but we've never been in that spot. So, I think Jason's point, stay in your lane, do the best you can, but understand that person next to you has a wealth of knowledge that you need to be able to tap into is really important.
So drawing on my experience sledding down a hill when I was 10 years old, probably not something.
You're ready. You got it all down. You're good.
Yeah.
Yep.
One word for you, Brandon: Madden. What goes into prepping for a video game? I know there's a lot of scripting there, but still, I mean, please give us that's an amazing experience, I would have to imagine.
Yeah, one I certainly never expected to be doing. I don't know though that it's that germane for this call, because it's a totally different skill set as I learned when I first started it. It's basically like being a voice actor, and it's 95% reading a script. So other than they'll send me the script about an hour ahead and I will peruse just to make sure I know what we're doing that day, there really is no preparation that translates to play-by-play that you're actually broadcasting with a live game in front of you. So I have received that question a lot from people on prep, but it really is totally 100% different.
There you go. I know we've got about 30 minutes left, and I do want to leave some time for questions. So a couple more from me for you guys, and then please, if you have questions in the chat, let's fire them off, and we'll do our best to answer all of them. You guys have done a really good job of touching on this, but I want to dive into this more. How do you balance your prep with your responsibilities in life? Married, kids, family, social life. You've got 3 games this week. What has to give? What hits the cutting room floor? Does anything hit the cutting room floor? When do you have to, stop because you've got a birthday party to go to, or because life happens? Brian.
I guess I would start with saying having a very understanding partner is key. My wife has been just incredibly understanding about all of these things and the time commitment that goes into it. But I think, yeah, there's times you just have to sacrifice, like you would with anything else in your life, right? I mean, there's times that I would love to spend another hour and a half going through the Detroit Lions notes, but I know that dinner time is coming up and my wife would like to watch something that was on the DVR. And so I need to make sure that I'm available to go and do that, as opposed to, spending that time. And then when the show's over, maybe I can come back upstairs and I can do some more things. But I mean, look, there's definitely, like I talked about before, sometimes when it is just having a lot of games, you have to prioritize what's most important. What do I have to get done for me to feel good about doing this? And if that means not knowing every piece of minutia, then that's fine, as long as I've got the headlines down. But there's a lot of give and take when you get into this business and you're young and you're single and the only thing you have to do is get ready for games. Then that's great. But when there are other people involved in the mix with a partner or kids, those are things that you also have to be priorities in your life. And so some of the work stuff may have to wait until later. And that's just the way it is. I think I've gotten much better at understanding that over the years. I think early on I was not good about that. But I think that I've gotten better. Like anything else, right? You live and learn as time goes on.
Jason.
Yeah, not married with kids yet on my end, but I do have some stops where I travel where I'll try to visit family. And for me, when I do that, I deliberately stay with them to know that, despite the traveling around that we do, that family is still very important and the most important thing in life for me. So I think trying to make sure to prioritize that. And like Ryan said, if I have, my little cousin loves to play basketball when we come to visit. So I'll make sure, like, if he wants to play basketball, we're playing basketball before I prep. I'll just push the prep until later and make sure, like, what are your priorities? The prep is important, but is family more important? Yes. So making sure that is a part of the day and just making sure what works. I think also knowing there are moments when you do have to cut things, like Ryan said, and like Ev said. I had a sequence last year where I had Butler basketball on a Tuesday. So I was in Indianapolis for that. It was a Fox game. Then I worked for different networks. So I had an ESPN game later that week at Louisiana Monroe for football. So I traveled to Monroe on a Thursday. I got sick Thursday night. So like it was pretty bad. And then coming up on the Sunday, I had basketball at Illinois. Monday, I had basketball at Northwestern. And then Tuesday, basketball at DePaul. So now I'm getting sick in Louisiana and, didn't sleep. You're sweating throughout the night. Have a football game the next day at noon. So I had to kind of battle through that. And it became a thing of what can I cut to still have energy? There's this, maybe this thing, at least for me, I don't know how you guys feel, where it almost seems like sometimes we have to be superheroes and we can't get sick. We can't be real human beings. But sometimes there are moments where you are a real human being and you get sick while you're traveling. So I got sick and didn't really sleep before the Saturday football game. Then I got up at 2 a.m. on Sunday, drove from Monroe to Shreveport, and then did Shreveport to Houston flight, then Houston to Chicago, then drove from Chicago to Champaign, then did a 6 p.m. tip for basketball the next day. Then the next day was basketball at Northwestern, next day basketball at DePaul. And it became a thing of trying to figure out where I could get sleep, but still do my prep, which led to having to remove certain things I like to do, but couldn't do. But what are your priorities there? Well, you need to know the players. You need to know the teams, need to know the coaches. You got to know the names of the guys you're about to call. So for me, that became the priority. Can I make sure I know these teams where I can do play-by-play and where I can do my job? And if I can get anything else, that's great. But trying to get through situations like that do happen as well. So there's always little moments where people don't see that behind the scenes and you're navigating some stuff, but you figure out what works best, what's most efficient in that moment to still do your job well.
Wait till Tim Brando hears Jason Ross got sick going to Monroe.
Louisiana Monroe, right. That's Timmy's school.
Yeah.
We got a few questions coming in, so I'll get to these now to make sure that we have plenty of time for anyone else. And on that same vein, Aaron wants to know, can you describe your schedule of managing your time to prep for each game when you have multiple games in a week? So we've gone over your process, but what does that time look like? And Brandon, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so I have learned this over time, and again, everybody has their own formula, but I kind of prep in 3 different chunks. And I mentioned my use of Microsoft OneNote. So if I have a busy schedule, and in 2 weeks, I have 13 games in 6 days with 12 different teams. Now, I've already started prepping for that. But when I have a stretch like that, I'm going to do it in 3 different stages. One is going over the baseline for each team. So that's where I look up the beat writers on Twitter. I read every one of their articles, see any interesting nuggets that they've recently said about the team. I compile all of that in OneNote. Again, every player has its page, and then there's one team page. Anything under the team notes goes in that section. Anything specific to a player goes there. After I've done that base coat of paint, then I move on to the second step, which is a deeper dive of actually building my boards. I've had the skeleton of my boards with player numbers and names and basic statistics. But then I am saying, okay, what do I want to take from this Microsoft OneNote document and move on to the boards that I think is relevant to this game, to the storyline, and to the viewer. And then that's level 2. And level 3, once I've gone through that and gone through each team's game notes, which is certainly vital for everyone to peruse that the SID provides, then I go back and watch at least 1, if not 2, of the last 2 telecasts for each team. If there's time, I'll do 2. If there's not time and everything's too crazy, I at least want to view 1 full broadcast. I get those off of a program called Synergy, but nowadays you can often get these on YouTube as well if you're covering any type of college athletics anymore. And I do that for 2 reasons. 1, because it helps me memorize the players and see what they look like and how they move. 2, I listen intently to the broadcasters. Maybe they have a nugget that you don't have that is vital information that you can pick up on. Hopefully that's not the case and you're prepared, but you might get an interesting nugget. But then secondarily, I want to know, did they deep dive on a story that I was going to do a deep dive on that maybe I'm going to reverse course on, or maybe I'm going to summarize it a little differently next time. Maybe I'll add a layer to it. And so those are kind of the 3 stages that I prep in. And I found that when you have a busy week, going through those, a base layer for every team, and then layer 2 and 3, if you need to, you can start to cut toward the end. But I don't want to sacrifice that first part because that's usually the meat and potatoes for me.
Yeah, Ryan, how about you?
Yeah,
what's that schedule like?
I've found, let's say doing Sunday Night Football, I've kind of come up with a schedule that I think works for me, that I have certain things I try to do every day and break it down, which for me works better. So like on Monday, when I'm flying home, I'm starting to build the skeleton of the boards, like Brandon was talking about: names, numbers, stats, those kind of things. Then on Tuesday, I'll take one of the teams and I'm going to go through their game notes and I'm going to get all the bio stuff done and do that. Wednesday, then I'll do the other team and go through and do them. Thursday, then I'm going to go through all of the supplemental research material that we get, the stuff not from the teams, but the different stuff that comes straight from the league. And I'm going to go through all those and add those notes then to my charts. And then on Friday is the day that I like to go through and watch games. I try to watch the last 2 games that the teams have played, again, to familiarize myself with what guys look like. Sometimes you can pick up on little things that, one guy's wearing 80, one guy's wearing 88. They look very similar number wise, but this guy wears neon green cleats. And so, right away, that's just a little tip, something you can look for there. I'm not as technically savvy as Brandon is. So I still have like my legal pad that I keep over here and like do my handwritten notes. And then I take those and then organize them on my boards as we get closer to the end of the week. But, look, I don't think there's one particular way to do it. I mean, some people are better when they cram. Some people are better waiting and trying to jam it all in because they just remember things that way. I found for me that kind of segmenting it out and doing a little bit each day is helpful. I also think that does help, going back to, we were talking about balancing responsibilities. I feel like when I have something every day, I can kind of check that off my list. Like, okay, that's done. And I did my 4 or 5 hours, whatever it is I needed to do to get that done. As opposed to waiting and having it all build up. And then when something comes up, a family obligation comes up, now I'm like, well, geez, I got all this work I got to do, but I know I got to do this. How do I find the balance there? I know that when I've got these 3 things done, I can do the family thing. I can make the other part of it work. So that's the important part. That's how it's worked best for me. But as the other guys have said too, there's a million ways to do this. You just have to find out what works best for you. And I think a lot of that is just trial and error. The more you do it, the more you find, okay, this works for me, this doesn't. And the more games you do, the more games you prepare for, the better you get with that.
Ethan wants to know, and I'll start with you here, Jason, and we can go down the line here. Take us into those prep meetings and calls with coaches and players. What are you looking forward to in those SID calls, those production meetings, especially for games, again, that you're parachuting in for a day and a half and then you're leaving?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ethan. I think for me, I like to have my charts done at least to a point where I have the skeleton ready to go and have my baseline of notes before I go into those calls. That way I can have educated questions ready to rock and roll for the coaches. Usually with football, it's a head coach, and then you have both coordinators, and then we will add on some players as well throughout the week. So I think for me, going back and watching a couple of their prior games and formulating questions is important going into that. Knowing what my analyst is going to ask for me, listening to what your analyst is asking in those calls is really important. That way, I'm also jotting down where I can tee him or her up in the broadcast. I think that's super important for me. So I always have a listening ear while I'm in those production calls, kind of thinking and formulating potential stories for our actual production meeting that is separate from that. That may be what you're referring to as well with our production team. That's usually producer, director, graphics people. Sometimes you have audio people, anyone else that might be on the crew that are in those meetings before a broadcast. So you're all on the same page. You're usually talking over your broadcast open. So what is being shown to us, the scene set before we come on camera for TV, is something that we might be told about. You might be told about that on game day at times as well, depending on what is shot by your director. But you get a general basis for what you're looking for before you come on camera. Then when you do go on camera, what are your topics? How much time do you have? Conciseness is something that we've talked about on radio. Also very important on TV and an open if you only have a certain amount of time. I'm starting to think about on really Monday or Tuesday, when you have that headline story that Brandon and Ryan talked about, well, what's your headline here and how quickly can I tee my analyst up for that in an opening comment? Then we might have, a player that you're going to talk about next, might be a wide receiver, quarterback, running back, an important aspect of that football game. Then you flip it over. What are you talking about for the other team? Well, again, how quickly can I tee my analyst up for that? That might be, one sentence or less. Something kind of a random side note here. I'd recommend for anyone out there in college taking any sort of writing courses you can to really learn how to structure concise sentences. I think that becomes very key to create as a habit when you get into TV or radio, because you're trying to constantly figure out how you're going to word something, but you can't necessarily always be thinking about it. So you try to make that a reflex for how concise you're going to be. So that was kind of a random veer off from this topic, but it's something I think about because I'm trying to think and formulate in my mind how I'm going to tee my analyst up in the open, depending on what we have. So that is a big topic in the production meeting. We're also going through graphics. So they'll send me a graphics packet the night before a football game, maybe 2 nights before, for, what do we have prepared on South Florida and their running game the last 2 weeks, or, for Everett I was just watching Canadians versus Kings last night and have one cool nugget on the Montreal power play. They're up to 40% since Ivan Demidov joined the first unit on the power play. So like that would be a graphic that they might have on that TSN broadcast for Montreal that power plays up to 40% since this date. And I want to know that. So I know the context of when he joined the top unit on the power play versus when he was on the second unit. So I think that's important stuff to then. I might take an idea like that if I see it in my prep, bring it to our graphics team. So little things like that are things I want to know going in, and know that our producer has all of that in the game notes too, in graphics. So I think just understanding everything that could be used is important. I like to review that stuff before the broadcast as well. We might not use all of it, probably will not ever use all of it, especially if you have a good game. But still having it in your back pocket and being able to have that in your mind will create chemistry on the crew, because you're all on the same page as to what you could go to, what could happen when something happens in the game. Like when you get close to the red zone, maybe you have a red zone graphic. So say we're at the 35-yard line, we're getting close to the red zone. I might hit talk back and ping my producer, hey, that red zone graphic, maybe if they get a few more yards here, we go to it. So it's like that's where it can help you in game based on what you talked about in the meeting. So it's situational stuff, just like you're a player, you want to understand the situational aspects of the game, and then know you probably have that in graphics and hit talk back with your producers. It becomes really a team effort. So long-winded answer here. I could talk about this stuff for days, but that's kind of a short, long-winded answer on that.
Brandon or Ryan?
I would just say quickly, there's a lot of good stuff there, Jason. For if you're broadcasting high school or lower college level and you are thinking, man, I never have access to that kind of information. There's not a beat writer. There's not a website with game notes. We've all done those games, and I understand that. And I remember making many mistakes on lack of preparation just because I was doing it wrong when I was younger. Keep in mind that those coaches at the high school and low college level, you should, in theory, have more access to them. So I always, after I learned how to do it, if I was doing a high school game on a Friday night early that week, I would reach out to somebody at the school, or usually you can get the coach's email on the line. Reach out to them and set up a time to talk to them. And then also try to go down pregame and talk to them to get any last minute nuggets. But I found that spending 30 minutes on the phone with a coach is so invaluable at that level, or if it's a Division III school, so that they can go through and tell you, hey, 87 is going to wear 85 this week, and Johnson's out with a flu, and this guy is an interesting story. His brother was all-state here. Little things like that can add so much to your broadcast, and it just takes a little foresight and a little effort and a little digging to make sure that you're talking to the right people leading up to the game that can really set you up for success. So I know it's hard sometimes when you feel like there's no information available online. Scour as much as you can online, but don't forget that old-fashioned person-to-person communication is still a really valuable tool in this business.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to what the other guys have said, and kind of picking up on where Brandon's going here, is, at the end of the day, the game is the main thing. Like, you can have pages of information and stories about this guy and that guy and everything else. At the end of the day, what do all of us care about the most? Who won, who lost, what happened in the game? So sometimes when you don't have reams of information, or you have the nightmare week Jason was talking about, you've been sick and you just don't have any energy. At the end of the day, what happened in the game? Who won, who lost, how did it happen? Sometimes that's the best thing that you can remember. And I know, going back to my days, especially in minor league baseball, where you have some incredibly challenging travel situations and whatnot, sometimes it's not about the great bio. It's simply about what happened, and give your best description, your best play-by-play of what happened and who won and who lost, and realize that's what people care about more than anything else.
Yeah, quick piggyback, E, if I may. There,
yeah, please.
That's such a good point, Ryan. Like I have a boss that always reminds me, the game is the thing. It's such a simple sentence, but the game is the thing. And I had a spot this past weekend working a college basketball game. It was a great game. It was Michigan State, Arkansas. It's going down to the wire. 4 minutes left, and I'm looking down at my boards, and I've got a story on Arkansas's point guard Darius Acuff that I want to get in so bad. And I'm looking for a spot to do it. And I was distracted for about 30 seconds. I mean, I was calling the game, but my mind was, how do I work this in? It was too late. It didn't matter. Was it a cool story? Yeah, I'm biased, but I thought so. I prepped for it, and I really wanted to get it in there, and I didn't. And I'm so glad I didn't. I call it crowbarring it in there, because at that point, it just wasn't relevant. Nothing that I would have said about him was going to have been more important than what was going on that court. That's all that everybody cared about. And so, yeah, Ryan, that's a really astute point that we all need to keep in mind.
I hate when that happens. We had a game last night against Columbus, and I had something that I was dying to work in, and the game just didn't allow for it, and I still have it on my sheet, so maybe I'll use it in March. I got one from Colin here, which I don't think we've talked about, but it's such a good question. When you're working with an analyst who's not your normal partner, what's the process on prepping for that person and their style that you're working with?
If I'll start here, I think that for me, I like to know their background. I think that can help you with, being able to refer to maybe what they've done at times in games, just understand who they are, who they were as a player, what position they played. That naturally can come up during a broadcast, who they are as a human being behind that. Maybe you're going out to dinner with that person if you have time, and that can create some chemistry. You hop on the phone with them ahead of time, maybe create some chemistry that way. And then sometimes you might not have time for that, but that I'd like to take that back to how often I was kind of trying to mention listening to them ask questions, whether it's, you're in the dugout for a baseball game before, that game starts, or, football production meetings, basketball shoot arounds, hockey morning skate, like trying to listen to what they're asking for me becomes important. That way I can figure out ways to navigate them. Brandon and I work with a producer by the name of Bart Fox, who likes to say, you're not just a play-by-play, you're also a host. And he likes to have us think of ourselves as we're hosting the analysts to where they want to go to. So I like to think of Bart in that situation. And yeah, he's one of my guys. So he'll tell me a lot about, you got to try to host someone this way or this way. And you just kind of have that in your mindset. So I think for me, I like to use that word hosting. And how can you do that? Sometimes it's easier than others, but yeah, that's my mindset on it.
Brandon.
Yeah, most of the guys, thankfully that you work with, and we work with several different ones, you've heard them before, so you kind of know their style. But if it's somebody like I'm going to work in a couple weeks for the first time with Greg Anthony, so I have already downloaded a couple of Greg's games from last year that I'm going to go back and watch just to see what his tendencies are, when he likes to get in, the things that make him tick, what he's passionate about the game. And I've heard him before, but I want to really be an intent listener and make sure that I know that and what he likes to talk about. And then, this is just more of a 40,000 foot view, and I'm sure everybody on this call already knows this, but I'll go ahead and say it. There's nothing more valuable that I learned early in my career, that how important it is to listen to your analysts. It is so easy when your analyst is talking, say, all right, well, while they're talking, let me look at my boards and see what I can say next. And sure, you're naturally going to do that. But if they say something that is more valuable, that needs a response or merits a response, then if you can add on to that, that's the magic elixir. That's when it's like you're next to each other on the couch with the viewer or the listener, and it's more of a conversation. And so I have a little card that I keep in front of me that reminds myself every game, like, listen to your analyst and make sure that they feel like, I'm not saying you need to turn and look at them, but I do often try to make eye contact with them, especially if they're in the middle of a long point, so that they don't think that I'm just nose down, head down in my board, so that they know that I'm engaged, that we're working with each other, because it truly is a partnership.
Yeah, I think the listening part that both guys talked about is so huge. What Brandon's talking about, I think is something that I still really work on a lot, because I think if I were evaluating myself and saying, okay, what are the weaknesses you have? I think there are times I get caught up in that. I get caught up in, okay, where am I going next? Or what do we want to do here? And, when you work with somebody all the time, you kind of know where they're going, or you understand. So you can do that and still have that conversation. Sometimes when you work with somebody new, I had this experience a couple of weeks ago. I felt more of a responsibility to kind of carry things. And I don't think I did a very good job of listening and being conversational, because I was thinking, okay, I got to do this, and don't forget to do this. But you do need to take that time to listen. Look, if you can go to dinner with these guys or spend time on the phone, obviously you learn a lot there. But Jason also talked about, when you're in those production meetings, listen to what your analyst is talking about, because then you're getting an idea of what they think is the most important thing. So even if you don't have time to sit down and say, okay, what do we want to talk about here? You kind of already know, based on the questions they're asking, what they think are the really important themes in this game. And you can use that in order to set them up during the course of the game. So we all talk for a living, but listening is a very, very important skill in this business.
Hey,
go ahead, Jason.
Can I throw a quick question out there for
Please.
the panel? So I'm curious, I think in this panel, we cover 4 different professional sports leagues: WNBA, NHL, NFL, and MLB. All these sports have rule changes from year to year. I think something that goes under the radar amidst the prep conversation is how important it is to know the rules. I think that goes overshadowed. Really important to review that going into each season. Curious for you guys how you go about reviewing rules and studying those that might be new rules from season to season in your leagues.
Yeah, I mean, The good news, sorry, Ryan, and I know it's the same for you on NFL. They do such a good job, the communications offices, of sending out PowerPoints and breakdowns of rule changes going into each and every year, and even for college basketball with some of the changes, they did that this year. So it's always just about making sure you go through that video thoroughly. Typically in those videos, the officials will maybe give their contact information. I always write that down just in case there's something in the season that I want a clarification on. But yeah, I think that if you're doing like high school or lower level college, that most of those entities, in fact, I would say all of them, the rule books are online. You don't need to know it front and back, but certainly you need to do your research. And if there is anything new that year that these viewers or listeners might not be privy to, you need to make sure you've got that buttoned up.
Yeah, I think you always have to review those things and always try to be cognizant of the fact, especially if there are certain changes, like I'm sure, with college basketball just getting started with the new challenge rules and things. I'm sure that you guys are reminding your viewers about that of, hey, this is the new rule this year. This is what the system is now with the challenges. And I think it's really important to do that, especially early in the season. But even as it goes on, you want to make sure, like Brandon talked about earlier, you want to make sure that the listener out there knows where we're at, because look, you might get to February in college basketball and you're like, I've explained this challenge thing 100 times. But you know what? There's a bunch of people that have been watching the NFL all season, and they're just now starting to watch college basketball when the Super Bowl is over. And so they still don't know about the challenge system and what it entails. So I think you have to constantly keep that in mind of making sure that everybody knows. And I'll tell you this too, just not necessarily in terms of rule changes, but the rule book. I mean, you ever want to give yourself a headache, read the baseball rule book. I mean, it is amazing. You'll get 4 pages in and be like, I'm done. I have no idea. There's going to come a time, something's going to happen, and you're not going to know what it is because it's some weird situation. Look, if you don't know what traveling is in basketball, you're in trouble. But when something weird comes up, I think personally, and I'd be curious what the other guys think, I think it's okay to admit you're not sure, or to ask your analyst, and even for them to say, I'm not sure in that situation, and get the clarification, rather than just go on about, well, this is what's about to happen. And then 20 seconds later, you get proven completely wrong because that's not it at all. There's some bizarre stuff, man. And even we've seen it throughout this season, college football. Sometimes the officials mess up. They don't know exactly what it is. So something's going to come up you're not going to know. I think when it's those arcane rules, it's okay to admit you're not sure.
We have
There's also, Ryan, I'll share this real quick, Everett. There's a detail in the men's and women's game this year that the men's game, the term is challenge. In the women's game, the term is appeal. So there you go.
Yeah.
We have a couple of minutes left, and I want to get to this one last question. We've had some questions about your charts and your boards and all of that. How much do you rely on your support staff, the spotter, the stats guys? If you use them, the charts like Tony Britt creates, do you create your own chart? Brandon, we had a request. Is your chart more than just a score book? Just take us in through your physical charts that we all have.
Yeah, I know we're at the end of it here, but I can just briefly share my screen if that's possible.
Should be able to.
Well, I feel like my dad right now because I'm going to click share and it doesn't give me the option to. So, anyways, okay, don't worry about it. Yeah, for me, for baseball, I'll just keep it to that because I know we're up against it here. Like I was saying, I really rely on OneNote. So I have my computer in front of me for the entire baseball game. This is different than for football and basketball. Football and basketball, I rely on my boards. Baseball, I rely on my computer and Microsoft OneNote, and I have the lineup with each guy. When one guy's up, his name is highlighted. There's all his information. Next guy comes up, I just take my mouse and click on the next guy. And then I print out 1 page of team notes for each team, and I have that in front of me. And that is, as Ryan was saying, the headlines. That is the biggest stuff that I think everybody needs to know so that I don't get too in the weeds. I've got weed stuff on my computer, but I've got the baseline headline stuff in front of me, a one-pager for each team that is what I deem the most important. So I do baseball a little differently, but since it's a slower sport that gives you the time to kind of maneuver around and click on your computer a little bit, I have found that to be a good formula for me personally.
Jason?
Yeah, so for basketball, I go handwritten. Hockey, I'm handwritten. Football, shout out to our guy Tony Britt, who's on the call right now. I rely on his charts for football. And then I also handwrite my own notes on there because it just keeps my mind a little more. That's just how I like to mentally operate. Wes has a picture of him there right up on his screen. And then gymnastics, I rely on my laptop. Then I have headlines for every sport on my laptop as well. So I know the overarching storylines for each matchup.
Yeah, Ryan.
I type all my stuff, but then I also have handwritten notes on mine, so it's kind of a combination. Football, I have it's basically an Excel sheet that I've used for years that I think works really well for me. I started using Tony Britt's stuff for basketball last year. I loved it. It was a massive time saver for me, especially in the tournament, and really enjoyed using that. To the point with the question about relying on stats and spotters and things like that. You know, if you get to the point where you're able to travel and have your same guy every week, obviously you trust that person. I think you're probably going to rely on them a lot. If you're in a situation where there's kind of a revolving door of people, for me, I learn pretty quickly who I'm going to trust and who I don't. And that's usually by the end of the first quarter of a football game, I can tell you whether I trust this person or not. I'm not going to make a big deal of it, but it will affect how I do the broadcast going forward.
Well, fellas, I mean, this hour flew by, and I don't know about you, but I could probably go another 45 minutes to an hour as well. Thank you guys so much for joining us today, to sharing your wisdom with these folks. And Dave, I'll turn it back over to you.
I appreciate it. Everett, thank you. Ryan, thank you. Brandon, thank you. Jason, thank you. Wes, if you're still there, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it. We'll have another one coming up in February. It'll be on job hunting with the aforementioned Howard Deneroff and Tom Bowman from Learfield. So watch for it on the website, and we'll send out emails to everybody who is on here as well. So thank you very much. I'm going to go start deciding whether I want to hit Atlanta Midtown traffic now. Odds are good I won't for another hour or two, but appreciate your time, everyone. Hope to see you all soon, and have a good night.